Thank you, and good morning to everybody. I wish I could be here all day, but just to advise, I will take questions because I've got to fly off to China this afternoon, so as part of our global commitment to our clients. So I'm here for the presentation, then I'm shooting off again, but I will try and take your questions at the end. So thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invite to present here. I'm John T. Wilson. I'm the UK Softlines Manager for SGS UK. For those that don't know, as I always say, we're one of the biggest companies nobody's really ever heard of. We're about a 6 billion Swiss franc company. The head office is in Switzerland. We've got 1,250 offices. In the areas that you might come across SGS, we do a lot of testing of garments at source, as well as the UK. So we have over 37 textile and clothing laboratories around the world, everywhere from 6 in China, 4 in India, Bangladesh, 2 in Pakistan, Morocco, Egypt, Turkey. Wherever the textiles are coming from, we are there. We also have the UK office and the testing facility. And one of the reasons for that is there's a lot more due diligence work going on with the retailers and brands. So there's a lot more taking product from the store to check it still is the same product that they tested at source, which might link into some of the things that you see in the UK market as well when you see product. So there is recognition there, but there's an awful long way to go. So there's about 75 to 77,000 employees within SGS, so we're quite a big dinosaur in that respect. But I work in the consumer testing services division, so we do everything from life sciences through to agriculture. We test everything from the fuels that go into the F1 cars to make sure nobody's put additives in to make them perform better. But my day-to-day job is testing textiles and clothes and speaking to the retailers and brands to make sure that we are servicing their needs around the world. The main areas in which SGS operates in, it actually started as an inspection business in 1878, where there was a guy in France saw grain arriving and just thought, where's that grain coming from? And who's checked it to see that it is the right grain that I ordered? And we started in France, and then during the World War we moved to Switzerland, and it all started around inspection, but now the verification, which is checking the goods and testing the goods, as well as auditing the factories from everything from technical capability to child labor, as the increasing environmental impacts is now one of the big things. I don't know whether anybody's heard of the zero discharge campaign by Greenpeace, but that is causing a lot of, wouldn't say panic, but a lot of sort of direction in the retail and brand area as they're told to reduce the effluent and the chemicals going out of their manufacturing facilities as well around the world. So we cover a wide range of areas, and we have quite a few challenges that we help to address. Sustainability has now become the core function of across all business units of SGS as we try and provide solutions that are better for the environment, that can help people improve their product, look at the packaging of products to see if they can make it in a more cost-effective way. But maybe the main area that is applicable to the group here today is the ensuring of quality performance and compliance with local and international markets. Now the speed, everybody is copying the Inditex model, so Zara and Bershka and that group of brands. It's probably the most successful global textile business there is out there, but they're very successful because of their speed to market and their fashion and their turnaround in fashion. And it has its drawbacks, but that's the model that everybody's trying to replicate now. So what you're now finding is that the time to market from design to actually arriving in the shop, you're down to about 6 weeks. And that is that's a very short space of time to get it made, delivered, tested, shipped, and have everything running smoothly all the time. So I suppose if it ran smoothly all the time, I wouldn't have a job, but that's what we're here for, and that's what we're also here to try and help improve. Just to give you an idea of some of the maps of where we are, you can see it's quite a global base. We tend to follow the sourcing, so we're now setting up in Cambodia, Burma, South America is increasing for sourcing patterns. So the textile supply chain is very diverse. Some retailers and brands are trying to consolidate their supply base to get better product and more volume through one factory. But we're talking about a global marketplace in terms of supply. But what that's leading to is also a global industry. It's always been that we're buying product from low-cost countries. Textiles is always one of the markets, the key sectors that if a country is developing, they will start with. It's always one of the first industries that gets developed in a developing economy. So the industry's traditionally followed the lower cost production, which is fine, but now we're also going on the other side, which is going to affect the members in the room today, is this drive of brands and global retailers to go global. And technical teams are being given 2-3 weeks notice to suddenly, we've been traditionally supplying in the UK market, and now we want to supply the US, now we want to supply China, now we want to supply Korea. And the actual implications of that are far wider ranging than has ever been involved for the UK market. In the UK, there are some legal requirements that need to be made, and what you have to say is correct on the label, and the fiber composition needs to be right, azo dyes need to be there. But you'll see in a slide later on, there's a lot more considerations. The more global markets that the brand wants to go into, the greater the balance of what they actually check versus what they need to check for a legal point of view for all the different markets. So we've got the global industry. The market's no longer the UK market, so you've got Zara that's going everywhere. You've got all the brands from Burberry having huge sales in China. You've got people like Jack Wills looking at overseas markets. You've got Cath Kidston, Arcadia being successful in America, and the Arcadia brands going out that way. So Topshop, Topman. So there's a big push on this global development, which causes us challenges as well, because we're suddenly needing to be the experts on every market's consumer requirements and labeling requirements, as well as the UK market. Thankfully, we've got a lot of people in a lot of countries, so we can help support that, but it's also impacting the decisions that the brands and retailers are making. As I mentioned, the speed to market is very critical, and it's being tougher to fit everything into the lead times. The overseas, it's the commercial divisions of the companies that are taking the overseas expansion because they see the opportunities, which is creating a higher pressure on the technical teams. And this balancing act is just becoming more and more difficult because there's only so much that they can spend on testing with ourselves or whoever else is doing it. Physical tests are one thing. The UK market has been very dominant in physical testing. Probably 80% of the testing that the clients do is around physical color fastness, shrinkage, tensiles. Overseas and European brands, 80% of what they do is on chemicals. They want to know what harmful chemicals are in their product. And that is what's driving the international markets. Now, the chemical testing is more expensive, whereas you can get a color fastness test for $5 in India with SGS and £10 in the UK. Your azo dye test, you're looking at £50 in the UK and maybe $30, $40 in India. So there is a cost difference there, and that's because of the analysis that's needed. But there's a big drive on health and safety, and that's being driven by legal requirements in other markets. The other thing that happens is when these markets are sort of launched into, there's a limited number of places that you can test product. So for China, you have to be approved by the China government to be able to test to their market, and that process probably takes about 6 months for each location. So you're looking at alignment of methods, you're looking at alignment of test equipment, chemicals, and what we try and do in SGS is once we've got the method up and running, it's centralized and controlled centrally so that every location that is approved to do that test is following the same method. Extraction temperatures for some of the chemicals can have an impact. The lead times, how you sample a product can have an impact on how it actually performs in the test. So if we just take one of these areas to give you an idea on a children's wear product, all these areas, this is what we called our canopy of safety, because on a children's wear item, these are all the risks that that the retailers and brands are having to take into consideration. Not only the performance of the garment, but then in design, is it going to suffocate? Is it going to cause entrapment of fingers? Can it cut? We've got some retailers that had sequins that weren't cut properly and scratched babies when the t-shirt was pulled off. So finishing elements like that. And this is coming under general product safety regulations, which is the middle part, which is they've got to develop a product for any foreseeable and potential unforeseeable now use, so misuse of a product as well. And all these come into the equation when they're trying to work out what they need to do and what they need to test for. You've got due diligence, so as I mentioned earlier, more and more retailers and brands are taking product when it's actually arrived in the UK and checking it and cross-referencing it with the tests that they've had done overseas. And then you've got the impact of REACH, which is, for those probably aware of it, but the restriction evaluation of hazardous chemicals in Europe. And all the impacts and the costs of ensuring that the supply chain is adhering to that are just a few of the areas in which the technologists at these the companies are having to mix with, then selecting which tests do we do with our budgets and how much can we afford to do. So one of the reasons why the passport is just this, to try and drive home the message that the market really is no longer just a UK market. We're struggling to get the balance right. It's new. This global expansion is new. The UK brands feel as though that the UK market is saturated, and what you're going to see is US brands. So you've seen Abercrombie & Fitch, Hollister coming to the UK. La Senza, which is now owned by Victoria's Secret. You'll see the expansion of Victoria's Secrets into Europe, and you'll see those stores. So all of a sudden you've got US brands coming in and being sold in the UK market. So part of our group is now educating the US brands on what the European market wants and the differentiations between France, Germany, UK. So all of a sudden, as these products get more global, it adds to the complications that are potentially there and how we deal with them. So the additional considerations as part of this, really, there's more legal requirements. As I say, in the UK, we have very few compared to some of the other countries on legal requirements for chemicals in final products. But if you go to Germany, even at their container ports in Hamburg and I think in Rotterdam in the Netherlands as well, if they've got any volatile organic compounds leaching out of the product in the container will be blocked before it even goes into the country. So now they're testing garments for releasing substances, formaldehyde. Formaldehyde's everywhere. But in the UK, believe it or not, there's not a legal requirement for formaldehyde. But the retailers and brands have set their own industry level, around 100 parts per million for adults and non-contact, 75 parts per million for skin contact. In children's, it's either between 0 or 20 parts per million. And what that tends to be developed from is this rush of the lead times. It's not that the formaldehyde in the use of the production is bad. If it's locked in and secured in the finishing of the production, it'll be fine. But what we're finding is, as things are rushed or shipments are tried to be hit, finishing processes are being cut short, maybe drying times aren't being led, or they've been taken out of before the process is finished, and that's leaving a residue which then evaporates and can cause skin rashes on people. So these type of things the retailers are now very focused on, and this is where the complications and difficulties with the dry cleaning industry come in. I'll come on to another point in which I think is one of the key areas. But what I'm trying to just sort of highlight is how these decisions, these everyday decisions that you might see from a mislabeling of a garment in the UK, may have come from a limited budget and 23 other decisions that have been made to try and make this product sell globally. Our biggest question this year has been, we want a global testing manual that makes our product sellable in every country around the world. And I go back to the brands and say, it doesn't exist. The countries are developing their regulations and their requirements so quickly that you can publish a manual that says, right, for this country you want to wash in this machine, and for this country you want to wash in this machine. And then they'll go and say, well, we're in Korea now. Well, in Korea, you've got to test in Korea. You've got to use the Korean equipment to get a mark on your label. For China, you've got to test in China or at a government-approved lab. In Russia, you've got to go through another scheme called GOST, where you've got to go through the Russian labs. So there's quite a lot of protectionist and strange schemes that the retailers are trying and brands are trying to manage and balance. As a result, what we're seeing is some tests get sacrificed. Yes, there are some suppliers in the supply chain that will always try and play tricks, and it might be that they've run out of, probably the big one that you might all see is the good old sequins melting on highly embellished product. And it might be that the actual product that's been tested at source is fine, but then the manufacturers run out of that colour sequin and just nipped down the local market, topped up the order, and then you end up with a product that's not performing as it should do. This we see quite a lot, and that has another impact on the chemicals, because what we find as well is that the highest risk product on chemical safety are accessories. So threads, additional embellishments, buttons from the local markets. They're where a lot of the harmful health and safety chemicals are still present. The likes of Dystar, Huntsman, all these big dye companies, they have dispersed dye black available in Europe, and they also have one available in India, but they can be different grades depending on the local market. So, you know, all these different areas start to impact on the end buyer's decision. One of our other areas is labeling. I'm sure you see a lot of it as well. We get a lot from the language side. What care symbols can be used? Which countries accept the ones used in the UK? Which ones do we have to put in the US? What does China accept? And this is where you start to see the care labels becoming more like a little booklet that you end up having to cut out or try and sift through in multiple languages and try and work out which bit's yours. We're seeing a lot of that, and I can't see that changing. That's going to get worse in one respect because it will get wider. Again, if you look at take the Inditex, so the Zara brands, the Bershka brands, they're global, so they're spending most of their testing revenue on harmful chemicals. They don't want somebody to get hurt. They don't want the publicity in Germany of having a garment that's got azo dyes in above the required limit that then means they have to take off all product from their store and burn it. What they're trying to do is label against as much, test as much as they can, but it's very difficult when you're selling to 30, 40 markets. It's almost, to be honest, it's a thankless task. You're always going to miss something. But we also see that the labeling is a tricky area because it's a technical language. It's not just a translation service. So going to translation companies sometimes doesn't work to get the right translation of a label. And that will have the same effect coming back to the UK market. So in some markets you need the label, just the wording. In some markets you need the actual symbols. And all these are being considered as to how to get this involved. And the labeling companies are getting more involved. And it might be something that's of interest to the group as well, to speak to the labeling companies that are involved with the brands to see about their trends in what they're being asked, because it will link into this whole global one label that was going to end up like a 400-page novel at some point for one garment, and the garment will probably hang that way because of the weight of it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting times, and the challenges that you have are probably the challenges that link into what we do around the group and with the questions that we're being asked. And from our point of view, I don't think there's one solution. I think there's lots of people doing good things to work towards it, but I wouldn't say there's a sort of a magic one that's suddenly going to eradicate all the problems within the next 6 months. There is other impacts of that will have areas that need more work. And one of the big things is really about the bottom point on this slide. The knowledge base is very hard to find. We struggle to find the right people to employ to be able to talk to retailers in the right way. One of the reasons is back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the universities stopped doing technology courses in textiles clothing. And when I was there, it was very technology driven. You learnt everything about fiber through to garment, through to all the processes, working time, management in factories, and you did absolutely everything about fabric, garment, manufacture, and how it's all developed. Then everybody wanted to be a designer, and the universities get money from having people attend. So all the technology courses reduced down to 20, 30 people a year, which wouldn't even fill the technology department of the Arcadia Group at say, in Topshop, or even one department at Marks and Spencer. So now you've got a lot of designers coming into the industry with design degrees that are having to be trained on the job. We speak to people that don't even know a difference between a knitted and a woven fabric. So, trying to get them to explain what a label is and what the labeling impact is going to be is difficult. So we're finding we're having to work harder for every dollar of our business, if you like, because the knowledge isn't there. There are some very experienced people that have been in the industry years, but then there's this gap in the middle where the new generation are coming through with a design background and can design a great product or have a design influence and go into a technology job to get into that company and then try and move internally. So we're seeing a lot of movement in retailers, a lot of people moving from one brand to another because people cannot get hold of the right expertise. And that's something that is part of my sort of really conclusion, is that education is going to be key. To look at some of the markets that I was talking about earlier, these are just some of the big ones that we hear about all the time. USA, China, Korea, Russia. We're starting to hear about South America, who are setting up their own standards. But then even if you look within Europe, France has a legal limit on formaldehyde at 100 parts per million. Germany, believe it or not, is set at 1,500, but then will test for absolutely everything else. UK, we don't have one. Azo dyes is there. Fiber composition is really about the only thing that needs to be right, and what you state on the label obviously has to be performed. So if they say it can be dry cleaned, it should be able to be dry cleaned. What you might also find in your industry is they sometimes put dry clean or hand wash only as a safety, should we say. It may be that they haven't had the budget, or maybe the wash test has been the one that has been sacrificed as they try and balance all the tests for the budget, and then the labeling changes to whatever it is to try and make it reduce their risk, should we say, reduce their risk. I had a test report the other day for one of the retailers, and it was a fiber composition. It was claimed 50-50 polycotton, and it came in as 60-40 polycotton instead, and I was being asked what they needed to put on the label. Now that gives you an idea of the type of questions we're getting, and how difficult this is as an area to approach, because it's so fluid in terms of contacts and movement. And you work for 6 months with one person, you think you're just getting somewhere, and they disappear somewhere else. And I know there's one of my contacts went from Reese to Dunhill and is now at Tommy Hilfiger Europe, and it's been in about 12 months. So I think she's a very clever businesswoman to get promoted so quickly, because I don't think you can deliver in that amount of time. But the countries are there, and all these countries have their own specific requirements, labeling, shipping requirements. We've got various ones in Europe, NGO activity, the Greenpeace Zero Discharge. If anyone wants to read about that, it's quite interesting. Is that you can download it from the Greenpeace website, but they're trying to sign up as many brands as possible to reduce the effluent and the harmful substances in what's coming out of the factories to zero by 2020, which is a very difficult challenge. So I was at a meeting the other week with Esprit and Nike and Adidas and various brands from around the world who have created this group to try and work towards it, because they can't do it overnight. So there's a lot more collaboration in the market, a lot more working together to try and target common goals. And as I say, reach is always there to be a part of it. This is really to give you an idea of just one part of the China regulations. So for China, any product being sold, this is the base requirements for a textile, a garment. In addition to those, this is in addition to what they have to do for Europe, because this is legally required. And what you might find is that the retailers actually have to start doing these tests as their base requirements, and lose some of the ones that are being used by the European market, because we don't have as many legal requirements. We do not have a legal requirement for color fastness to water, or pH value, or perspiration. The way the Chinese look at it is if the perspiration, if there's a bad result in perspiration, then harmful chemicals could leak out of the product if the color goes with the perspiration. So different markets are looking at it in a different way. And if you actually look at the China model, if we start again, like they've done from scratch, it's quite a clever model, because any garment of a specific type in their local market has to comply with these tests. Doesn't matter value, doesn't matter type, brand, anything. It's very structured, very black and white. And in addition to these, they have product standards. So if it's a t-shirt that's got a set of standards that must comply, if it's a suit, it needs these tests doing. But all the time, these are the base standards. And it's the same for leather, same for footwear. And they've got a very sort of centralized way of doing things. But for the European market, where we've got so many brands that have been working so differently for so long, trying to adapt into that is quite a difficult change. This was just a highlight on REACH, just to give you the complexity of it, really. Retailers are still trying to get their head around it. We spend a lot of time trying to talk about it, responsibilities of what chemicals are in their final product and in the right quantities. And this is covering things from phthalates. Phthalates seem to be the big target of this area. But there's a variety, there's about 178 chemicals now on the candidate list. And basically, if you're using them, you're meant to be able to either declare it, or you're meant to be able to calculate how much you're importing, to be able to say to the ECHA in Helsinki, I think it is, that you know, we've got this chemical and we would like to use it, and they will tell you yes or no. So this is a big influence on the retailers. Like I said, Debenhams are doing a lot of work on this at the moment to make sure that they comply. It's across all product categories as well. So thoughts for the UK market and for today, really. I hope it's sort of given a highlight of all the different areas that people are having to think about when they're trying to get the product right. I'm sure the problems that you're finding are the same problems that we get when we're suddenly told, oh, we tested that product in India or in Turkey, and now we've got a complaint about it. What have you done wrong? And it's not necessarily that we've done anything wrong. It could be that something's changed in the product. We test samples that are sent to the lab at source. When the product gets to store, we've tested maybe 1 out of a 10,000 piece order. So it depends on how good the supply chain is, how honest the supply chain is, that leads to the actual componentry that they're using, how they've labeled it, typing errors on the labels, how the labeling company is working with the retailer, and then also what they've spent on testing in terms of which market that's going into. There's a lot of money spent on testing. The likes of Next do a lot, M&S of course, but even some of the lower cost brands are starting to ramp up what they're doing on quality. Seems there's a big drive on quality at the moment in the marketplace. All of a sudden people don't want to be in the press for bad quality recalls, the cost of recalls. It's a lot more transparent. I don't know whether anybody's heard of RAPEX, R-A-P-E-X, which is the European recall system, which is available online to anybody within Europe. So these companies that are going into Europe and selling in Europe, if you have a recall in France of your product, it goes on the RAPEX, and then any market that is on the product, the local authorities can recall it based on that recall, and you have to pay each time. So that's why people are trying to stay out of these recalls, but it's mainly on safety and chemical influences. Nickel maybe in buttons or things like that. Very useful tool, free to see. So worth looking at, give you an idea of who's doing. Interesting enough on that one, it's the Eastern European markets that are recalling the most product at the moment in their markets. So if it's coming through Eastern Europe by road transport, it's getting stopped. Or if it's being sold in Eastern Europe, in Romania or one of the Eastern European bloc countries, it might be sold fine in the UK, but it's being blocked or being recalled from the market in Eastern Europe. So the dynamics of the market are changing, and that's what the retailers and brands are trying to work for. And they're seeing the business potential. I mean, China, just a number of people. America, you know, the desire for UK brands, it's proven by the Topshop, Topman push. China's huge for the designer brands. Some designer brands are very open and honest, like Burberry, do a lot of work on it. Other designer brands will openly admit they do very little. We find actually the higher up you go, probably the less checking that's done, because people are buying into the brand. They're not buying into anything else. They don't really mind. I've seen Vivienne Westwood T-shirts with the spirality of, well, the seam comes down there on some of them. So, you know, it's happening. It's happening. And what we're also seeing is, out of all our tests, yes, chemical failures are high, but one of the biggest physical failures is shrinkage. Shrinkage, which has come from a push into viscose. Viscose is in the fashion trend. We've seen shrinkage from 10 to 20% on test reports. And then, you know, the retailers have their commercial tolerances, which are set lower, which they would accept. But then it might be another production run of another fabric, and has that second production run of the fabric been checked? And there's lots of difficulties in the supply chain, which people are working towards to try and sort out. And as I say, there's not a magic wand, and there's some good people out there, and some people aren't doing as much. But all will probably lead to highlighted cases and instances in the dry cleaning trade that will lead to possible problems when you get that one garment that suddenly collapses or delaminates, or the buttons come off, or something happens to it, and then it's the investigation process from it. But one of the biggest things, I think, and that's what I was touching on earlier, is just the education. I know that the retailers, one of the most as part of the ASBCI, which is the Association of Suppliers to the British Clothing Industry, and my role there's a student element of it, and then there's a commercial element for the retailers and brands. And one of the most oversubscribed visits every year is the visit to Johnson's, who offer the retailers and students tours around the dry cleaning plant in Northampton. And the reason for that is because they've never seen it. So many people are coming into the industry that don't visibly see the process. So it's all theory. And when they actually see it and see highlighted problems and what the problems could potentially be, it puts two and two together for them, and then creates a new wave of working, a new direction for them. But they've, out of all our technical visits, and that's to worsted weaving places, and to people like Advanced, to a sort of distribution and processing people, you know, it's always the dry cleaning part that is of most interest at the moment to retailers. I think people know there's a problem, and everybody's trying to work out which is the way. So I think probably being more combined, we're involved in it because we test at source and we test from store. So we see the variation, and I'm sure if you dry cleaned a variety of product from that one shipment, you would see probably variation between shipment and shipment. It's just that we don't get to see the whole picture, and we're all working in isolated pockets, but it all has a role to play in the bigger area. As I mentioned, the universities, some are starting up the technology courses again, but it's 10, 15 years of design graduates coming through into the textile industry. So, you know, it's not going to be a problem that suddenly goes away. We've got to educate and train and expose the students and the lower rungs of the retailer and brand structures to what is happening in the industry, because they have not seen it. They have not seen it. The manufacturing's gone away, so we see it. They don't even know the manufacturing process, so they don't see that part either. So we do a lot of tours around our test labs because they don't understand what happens when we do a dimensional stability to washing to show how much shrinkage there is. So they're things to think about. So I suppose really as a conclusion, we as a UK industry have our role to play in this diverse and global supply chain, but also the challenges will be increased by the global expansion into other markets, where we have international brands coming into our market and our brands going to international markets with a limited budget to try and make one product comply with the global markets that are out there. And the only way we can do that is by educating and helping the overseas brands, the UK brands, and trying to find the best way for them. So that really is a sort of a pause for thought, if you like, just to highlight all the variety of decisions made that come into a product that you see at the end in the caring process. So thank you very much for your time, and if you've got any questions, I'm very happy to take any.
Any questions for Jonty? Any questions?
Yes.
You just got a microphone.
Yeah.
Well, is the industry taking that into account as well?
Yeah, well, you see, everybody's looking at it. I mean, because of the global pressures. If you look at the US and the PERC and the push to get rid of PERC in the US and where they are in that marketplace, everybody's been very interested in new technologies. I'd say it's relatively new for the retail part. I think Green Earth have been very, very active in the retail sector in promoting the solvent-based sort of siloxane solution. Obviously, there's Electrolux and the aqueous and the wet cleaning. So it's there, but I don't think the profile is quite probably where it could be yet. But people are definitely looking for alternative solutions, and if it can be proven that it's going to give them a good cleaning process after the product is made and it's a consistent process, then they will look to that. But I would say it's again, education is going to be needed to try and develop that, and that will come from, and there's a development on the care label and the care symbols, and that will probably lead to more questions to the likes of SGS and probably the dry cleaners as to say, what's all this about? And then we'll go in and it will filter through the industry that way. But we're trying to, as SGS, we're trying to get involved in as many new technologies as we can because we're an independent third party. We're working with a variety of people on independent research papers to try and give people comparative results on variety of cleaning methods to see what the impact is on a color fastness to dry cleaning test or a dimensional stability to dry cleaning test on a variety of methods. So there's a lot of questions starting. For the last year, it's increased. Wet cleaning, last 6 months to the last end of quarter, I've seen a few more inquiries coming in on that area. But it's certainly changing. I think it's certainly changing, and there's a lot of interest in new ways and new methods of doing things. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
As a guild, we inform our members in the form of alerts every month the garments that have failed in normal dry cleaning. That's either because of delamination, colour runs, etc. They follow the label and they've broken down one way or the other during the dry cleaning. We send out the alerts to alert obviously dry cleaners when they to warn them about these garments coming into them. Would it be any use to you and would it help if we let you know exactly the problems that dry cleaners are having?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these, to give you an idea, one of the biggest things that we are in demand for is information. We do things from SGS's point of view called safeguards, and that's really to update the retailers. A standard might change or a test method might be updated, and what they want to know in a very bite-sized summary piece is what's changed and what do they need to know about. And one of the latest ones that's caused them problems, for example, is sunglasses. That's completely changed, and they've already ordered the sunglasses for next season, and the standard comes in too late. So anything that gives them information, they're all looking at their supply chain. They're all looking at their good suppliers versus their bad suppliers, supplier scorecard systems to try and assess, taking into consideration who's got a good ethical stance with the best performance on a technical audit, and then from testing how well they're performing and using a scorecard system. So if this information right from the end comes, it can feed into that as well. I think it's important to be seen as a partnership. I think some brands and retailers personalities can be quite precious sometimes, so we have to be very careful on how we manage that information. It's got to be perceived as a helpful solution, and I would say they would be very interested to know if you can open the dialogue either via ourselves and the connections we have or the guild with the brands and retailers that would highlight specific contacts within those organizations of issues that they're having, then I think that would work very well. If it's seen as a sort of a stone throwing exercise, then they would probably block it and it wouldn't be as collaborative. So I think it's very useful information because they might not get to see it and they might be aware of it, or it might then tie into other things that they're seeing. So yes, in summary, I think it would be a good process to try and facilitate somehow. Yeah.
labellings that come from, say, specifically India, and Indian clothes that just says dry clean on them?
I think,
Is there a desire for testing in India now? Or anything like
yeah, I mean, India is one of our biggest locations. To be honest, we've got 4 labs from Tirupur, Bangalore, Delhi, Chennai, everywhere. Again, it's going to come down to, it's not necessarily the manufacturer, because they're taking their instruction from the retail and brand. Now, what you'll tend to find is that some manufacturers have a lot of experience and can interpret what the retail and brand is saying if need be, because of their local relationships with labelling companies or the way they've been working. On others, they'll say, that's what you've told me, so that's what I'm putting on my label, because that's what you've asked me to do, and there you go, that's your product. So there are mistakes that happen. There are typos that happen, or the wrong labels that can be attached. We've seen wrong size labels put into garments. We've seen, variety of issues that happen at that point in time. But it's not just about the manufacturer. It's linking it back to the brand and retailer as well, to make sure they understand what their labelling guidelines are. Something like the Arcadia Group, for example, has a set of care symbols, and they've got a code that links to a set of care symbols and wording, and that gets put onto each of their products or their product orders to the manufacturer. So if there's a problem with one of those, then really it can only be influenced by the head office before it gets, unless there's been a mistake or a misunderstanding of the actual wording. So I think that the problem is more head office level. Yes, there are all manner of ways going to be manufacturers that might make mistakes and have done something or have not understood or have tried to do something differently and it hasn't worked out. But that is part of our industry, really. It's unfortunately not controllable enough to definitely say it's one or the other. So it's a bit of a washy answer, I know, but I don't think it's just India. I don't think it's just manufacturers. I think you'll find issues from a variety of industries, countries, and the head offices have a lot of influence on that.
Jonty, thanks very much.
Thank you. That's okay.
I don't want to delay your flight.
That's okay.
I know you're off
Yeah.
to China,
I
but
am.
thank you very much. That
No
was really
problem.
enlightening to see
Good.
how it works.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.